You're listening to the Assembly Call IU podcast and postgame show, the place where Indiana fans across the globe hang out online after every IU basketball game. Join us for our live broadcasts on Thursday nights and immediately following every IU game at our website, assemblycall.com. That's assemblycall.com. Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most urgent topics in the never-dull world of Indiana basketball. This is our 115th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 506th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, March 28th, 2019. I am your host, Jerod Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion. Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment occurred at the 6:06 mark of the second half in Wednesday night's McDonald's All-American game. That is when Georgia signee Anthony Edwards found Trace Jackson Davis cutting through the lane for an uncontested dunk. Trace scored 7 points, collected 5 rebounds, and blocked 1 shot. But more than what he did during the game, it simply mattered that he was in the game. Because as we know, the path to hanging a banner almost always requires at least one burger boy leading the way. You've probably heard this before, but I'll issue a reminder. Since the McDonald's All-American game went national in 1978, only 2 schools have won an NCAA title without a McDonald's All-American. UConn in 2014 and, get the censor beep ready, Maryland in 2002. Indiana's 1981 national championship team featured McDonald's alums Ray Tolbert, Landon Turner, and Isaiah Thomas. The 1987 national championship team featured Daryl Thomas and Ricky Callaway. In fact, Indiana hasn't even made a Sweet 16 since 1978 without having at least one McDonald's All-American on the roster. So, does Indiana need to get old and stay old by building its rosters around 3- and 4-year players? Yes. And does Indiana need to recruit players who may have a triple-digit ranking but can fill specific roles on the team and in the program? Yes. And does Indiana have a rather underwhelming history of team success with one-and-done players on the roster? Yes, though each season had its own peculiar set of circumstances, so I'd caution you on drawing any definitive conclusions from a very small sample. The point is this. All of these considerations need to be balanced with the reality that competing at the highest levels of college basketball is always going to require having the best talent. And that means you better be making a habit of enrolling players who were selected for the McDonald's All-American game. Trace represents Indiana's 7th McDonald's All-American this decade. Half of them won a Big Ten title and played in the Sweet 16. The other half did not. Time will tell what Trace's destiny as a Hoosier will be. Hopefully his experience is more like Cody, Yogi, and Thomas's than Noah, James, and Romeo's. Hopefully it goes beyond them all. Okay, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, he is the Tim Miles of Girls Youth Sports Coaching in Cincinnati. He is the president emeritus of the Robert Johnson Fan Club. And if bracketologists were seeded according to their bracket matrix rankings, he would be a 3 seed. He is Andy Bottoms.
Well, Kevin Durant plays shooting guard. I should have Evan Fitzner play shooting guard.
Andy, what is your Bottoms line on the last week in Indiana basketball?
That drop doesn't seem, I don't remember the context of that, but it certainly didn't hold up well. I'm also not sure if the Tim Miles comment suggests that I've been fired or like Coors Light. Neither of those is really true. So, well, I'll just move on from there. From an IU perspective, just the season finally comes to an end. It feels like another time where we sat here and tried to draw conclusions from the Hoosier Hysteria scrimmage and some of the guys that we saw there. And that doesn't feel like it could possibly be the same season as this one, quite honestly, at this point, given this was like 3 seasons within a season. It felt like, and when you step back and look, I mentioned this at the end of the show the other night, if you look in Archie's 2 years, the adjusted defensive efficiency has gone from 104th to 65th to 30th, the 74 spot improvement, at least from a ranking standpoint, is really impressive and speaks to the groundwork that Archie's trying to lay and what the identity of the team is intended to be. And then you look across at some of the other numbers, the numbers in red, which is never good from a KenPom perspective, and you see that the 3-point shooting has been outside of the top 300 in both of his seasons, and the free throw shooting has been outside of the top 325 in both of the seasons, and it isn't really that hard to look at what really needs to change next year, because I think that you run into these scenarios where you have to be, and you guys I think talked about this on podcast on the brink, you have to be so good and almost perfect at everything else to try to mask deficiencies like what we've seen from IU. And so as we look forward to the offseason, which we can sadly now start to do, it just doesn't feel like it's that hard to figure out what has to change. Now, how that changes is the hard part, and why Archie gets paid a whole bunch more than we do to do this or really anything else. But I think that really is what the intrigue comes in. And as we talked about a little bit before, there are just so many different storylines, oddities, things to really keep an eye on in the offseason, that this will be a really, really interesting one and a pivotal one for this team, because I think next year becomes a really pivotal one for the staff.
And to my right, he is a columnist for The Big Lead, a co-host for The Hangover, and as we turn our attention to next season, he just wants Indiana to field a team that looks like it's having fun.
It's easy to enjoy watching guys enjoy themselves.
He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, what is your rant this week?
Boy, that taken out of context, that could be a really, really dicey quote, huh?
Easy to enjoy watching guys enjoying themselves.
Yeah. Really, really bad one. Thanks for that, Jerod. I appreciate you saving that one in perpetuity. I actually want to go completely off the page in an Indiana related basketball moment this week that I think was a positive that I think it's nice to see. Thomas Bryant the other night had 18 points and 19 rebounds for the Washington Wizards and played 40 minutes and had the game-winning layup, and he got fouled and made the free throw. It's really great to see Thomas doing well. He's a guy who I think we were all really high on heading into the draft, realized that Indiana had a tough season before his draft year, but I thought he was wildly undervalued in that draft. We all talked about it. I think we all agreed on it. I thought the Lakers got a steal in the second round. He had a great season in the G League last year, just wasn't room on the roster for him this year. I know for a fact, I talked to some people with the Lakers. They really love Thomas, and they sort of thought that Ivica Zubac fit what they were doing well, and then they went and traded Zubac too, because the Lakers are just a mess right now. But it was a shame that he had to move on from that situation, but he has gotten to a place where he is thriving. His player efficiency rating of 20.78 is fantastic. He's going to be a really good NBA player, and he's a guy who loves IU and comes back to IU, won a Big Ten championship at IU. This is the kind of guy you want to have representing your program. We all know what kind of a great kid Thomas was, kind of an enthusiastic, just a fun kid to watch. And I really think that this is just a huge deal for Indiana, that Thomas is breaking out at the next level. As I think we all thought he would after his freshman year. We thought this is the kind of player he'd be. And then his sophomore year, obviously everybody at IU struggled. Then there was the coaching change and all that. But Thomas is a guy who, even with the coaching change, has embraced IU, has come back to IU to work out, has come back for games. He's a guy that's really big in that sort of family thing. And he and some other guys like OG Anunoby and some others have discussed, how have kind of shown that Archie Miller's really embraced guys who didn't necessarily play for him and wants them to come back and be a part of the program. So just great to see Thomas doing well. He's been over 20 a couple times this year. He's been a rebounding machine. He's starting to knock down some threes, and it's just great. As we know, he's just a fun kid to watch. So best wishes to Thomas, who I hope is doing great.
Absolutely. It's been awesome to see. All right, here's what we're going to talk about this week. We will each give our one word to describe the 2018-19 season. No curse words, fellas. We'll talk about the biggest offseason storyline, which is what additions are going to be made to next year's roster. We'll discuss our wish list, and then we will answer your questions here. All of that coming on this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. Before we get to all of that, I want to talk real quick about sleep and why you need to buy your next mattress from our friends and the fellow IU grads and fans at Comfort Option. First off, they will actually come to your house. Seriously, if you live in Indy or Bloomington, you can schedule Comfort Option's revolutionary in-home mattress service.
There's a van with a bed in it, and they just put the mattress together right there, and you lay on it, and you decide if you like it or not.
Right there at your house. Plus,
they don't charge you extra to come build the mattress at your house.
They don't. And if you don't live in Indy or Bloomington, you can still order one of their Alpha mattresses online, and they'll deliver it anywhere in the U.S. Longtime Assembly Call listener Megan Mahaffey and her husband went with the Alpha Medium.
We've been really, really pleased with how the Alpha Medium has felt. I am physically sleeping better.
Also, Megan's husband isn't snoring anymore, which is a massive bonus. And to top it all off, Comfort Option offers a 30-90 satisfaction guarantee to make sure that you love your mattress. Bottom line, they want the mattress buying experience to be more pleasant than it's ever been.
The whole thing, start to finish, went incredibly smoothly.
So go to comfortoption.com right now and either order your Alpha mattress or schedule your in-home mattress store service today. And when you do it, use the promo code ASSEMBLY to get $50 off your purchase. Again, comfortoption.com, promo code ASSEMBLY for $50 off. Get the mattress that's right for you. Don't leave your sleep to chance. It's too important.
We want you to live.
Yes, we do.
Can we get some basketball, please?
Okay, back now to talking basketball, gentlemen. So, look, obviously we are here embarking on the offseason. It's going to be a long, cold, pensive offseason, I have a feeling. But before we dive into that, which we're going to do in segment number 2, and we'll spend some time, obviously, this offseason reflecting on this season, but let's take the rest of this segment to just kind of reflect. I mean, the wounds are still fresh. There's still, fresh scabs to pick here. But let's reflect a little bit on this season that just went by with one word to sum it up. And Andy, we'll start with you. What's your one word to sum up 2018-19 that can be said on the radio? Because remember, this is live on the radio.
I got pretty far down the list once you said we couldn't swear and had to be things we could say on the radio. So I guess unpredictable is what I would go with. I think really throughout at the beginning, I don't think anyone would have predicted the hot start. No one would have predicted the things to go off the rails, at least not to the extent that they did. And I don't think after playing that poorly that long, the one game you win in that stretch is at Michigan State. Unpredictable. Then you somehow pick yourself off the mat. String together wins against some teams that IU hasn't played well against at the end of the season to do that, and then everybody starts to feel good and lose the in the Big Ten tournament. That part was actually probably predictable, but in general, I just thought the ebbs and flows of the season were really, really, really difficult to figure. And I think as we look back, we all got sucked in pretty quickly, and got. I think we tried to temper some of our enthusiasm, optimism, whatever you want to call it earlier, because we'd gotten burned a season ago, and that Marquette game, I think everybody just threw that out the window, and the bottom fell out shortly thereafter. So it was a weird season. Weird was the other word I would have I considered using that was an acceptable term.
Yeah, Ryan, what is your one word to describe the season?
What the fuck?
Whoa, no.
Hey, to anybody listening on the radio, that wasn't me. Come on.
Sure sounded like you.
Schizophrenic is my word for this off season. It was 3 seasons in one. It really was. There was the first half where they started 12-2. Then there's the next part where they lost 12-13. And then there's the last part where they seemed to play pretty well. And honestly, if they had Romeo Langford in those last 2 games against Arkansas and Wichita State, I feel like those are different outcomes. I feel like Arkansas, they beat pretty handily with Romeo because the one thing they were missing there is somebody to drive the basket consistently. And then I think against Wichita State, they just needed a boost offensively, and that's something he could give them. So I would say, I think that schizophrenic, because I thought that towards the end of the year after that Minnesota game, they really played well, and they started to turn it around, and you'll take what they gave you from that game on. You'll take what they gave you if that's the effort you're going to see from this team. Those 12-13 that they lost, you don't want that. And then the 12-2 start, I mean, there were a couple shaky performances in there, but there are shaky performances early on in every season, and I thought that that was indicative of what that team was capable of. So it's just a schizophrenic season, up and down, it just couldn't decide which season it wanted to be, the first one, the second one, or the third one. And it was really a shame it ended the way it was.
It's interesting. We're all kind of hitting this from different angles because obviously, the way that the season ebbed and flowed, it was so strange. And my word is deflating because, it's like the balloon of hope and excitement just kept getting blown up, and then it would just deflate. And kind of deflate with that really annoying screeching sound when someone's like holding the bottom of the balloon really tight, because that's kind of how it felt. Romeo signs, Juwan returns, but then Jerome Hunter and Race Thompson are out. And then we beat Marquette, but then we lose at Arkansas. And then we start out 12-2, and then we lose 12 out of 13. Win 4 in a row, lose in the Big Ten tournament. Win 2 straight in the NIT, lose right before going to New York. So it's like every time you got really excited and like started to believe and have real legitimate hope, right around the corner was some kind of disaster that was waiting. And I guess you could always flip that around and say every time there was, disaster, there was something coming around the corner to give us hope again. But considering the context of how the season started and, the talent that was here and having Romeo and just all the expectations, it was just really deflating because we all hoped that this season would be more. It certainly felt like it could have been more. At times it looked like it would be more, but it, the air just always got let out of the balloon and the wind always got taken out of our sails. So my one word would be deflating. Any other honorable mention words that you guys want to throw out real quick?
I think they all kind of fall in the same thing. I mean, inconsistent was another one just from an effort standpoint, from a shooting standpoint, from a who was contributing standpoint, at least as a supporting cast. Injury riddled would have been another one, but yeah, the two I was down to were really inconsistent and unpredictable. So, but I think all of them really get at the same thing.
Yeah. Any other ones for you, Ryan?
Nah, I mean, not for one word. I think you guys summed it up pretty well. If you could go with a couple words or phrases, then it would be different, and a lot of them would be a little more colorful than we're allowed to use on the radio. But yeah, I think it was disappointing, deflating, and really schizophrenic and whatever. All pretty much sums it up.
And that was the most depressed I've ever been.
It seems a little much.
I'm sorry, you're wasting drops.
All right, fine. All right.
Was it the off season for you too?
Yes.
To get in shape for the regular season?
It is, yes. Coming up in the Assembly Call, it's time to start looking ahead to next season. Indiana has at least one scholarship projected to be available. How do we hope Archie Miller will fill that? And any other scholarships that may come open this offseason, we will discuss next. Stick with us on the Assembly Call. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to participate in our unedited live broadcast,
Chat mobbers,
or watch those replays, then check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. As Chat Mobber Chad once put it,
hearing the stuff in between, you get to know you guys a lot better.
Like the time on a recent postgame show when Ryan blatantly and proudly was caught not paying attention. Ryan, let's talk real quick about...
I don't want to cut you off. I know. I always say that. But one stat we missed that was really important that we missed. Points in the paint. Indiana.
No, you missed it. I said it.
Oh, well,
so
I didn't.
Number one,
I don't listen.
Number one, pay attention to the show. Andy, I so wish that I had you for backup when that happened on the Arkansas postgame show.
It was funny because as I was listening to it, he jumped in with that, and I was like, "Yeah, that was just said." So,
yeah,
to be able to hear you calling up for it was good. I'm glad that you just didn't let it slide.
Jerod, your voice is just so soothing that we fall asleep over here. I mean, that's what happens. We can't pay attention because it's just.
All right, I'm Jerod Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips.
Will this be on the podcast?
Yes, this will be on the podcast, Ryan.
Was that on the podcast? That last
that last part was on the podcast, yes.
You didn't edit that out, okay.
No, definitely did not edit that out. Okay, so we've gotten obviously lots of questions that have come in. So one of the questions is a really good jumping off point for what we're going to talk about in this segment, and then we'll hit a bunch of other questions in our mailbag segment coming up next. But JD asked us, what will be the biggest storyline of this offseason? Probably several options to choose from. And there's a ton of offseason storylines. But I think it's safe to say that the biggest offseason storyline is who stays and who goes. Because, what the roster ends up being at the beginning of next year, that's going to obviously have a huge impact on how good this team is. So that, to me, is the biggest storyline. And, we take the first part of that, who stays. If every player currently on the roster returns next season, there are no open scholarships right now, okay? But we all assume that Romeo is gone. Transfers are obviously very common in this day and age of college basketball, especially for players who are not playing minutes, who are playing far from home, who are playing for a different coach than the one that recruited them, especially for guys who, have multiple of those factors. So I don't think any of us would be surprised And we're not going to speculate on who it might be because it could be a lot of different people. But I don't think any of us would be surprised if, one or more players end up seeking opportunities elsewhere. If I had to bet, I would expect that Indiana will have 2 scholarships to fill, Romeo's and 1 more. We'll see. Maybe not. Maybe there's just the 1. Maybe there's 3 or 4. Who knows?
Just to clarify for people listening, so Juwan Morgan and Evan Fitzner have scholarships and are gone. Zach McRoberts was not on scholarship.
Right.
And then you fill those with Trace Jackson Davis and Armand Franklin will be coming in. So I just wanted to clear that up because that wasn't really opening from the intro there. So it's going to depend on who else leaves.
Absolutely. So let's assume that we're going to have a scholarship or 2 to kind of play with this offseason. What is your wish list, Ryan? I'll go with you. It seems like there's a couple obvious things that this team is going to need, but what does your wish list look like for this offseason?
Well, of course, we don't really know because of the big factors. Is Jerome Hunter going to be healthy? Assuming he's healthy, because my first priority, if he's not going to be back, my ideal guy would be sort of a wing scorer, somebody who can get points driving and shooting off the wing. If he is going to be there, I'd like to get a pure shooter, whether that's a point guard or a combo guard or somebody who can step out and knock down shots consistently. I think that's the biggest thing that's missing. Now, I think that Armand Franklin is going to be a good shooter once he knuckles down and works on his shot. I think that Rob Finnessy is going to be a good shooter once he starts to work on his shot more. And I think there are going to be some guys on this team who can get better and more consistent shooting the ball from deep, but they need to go get another guy who can shoot. And I think that as far as the front court right now, I think Deron Davis, pretty solid if he can get in shape after the offseason and remain healthy. That's a big thing for him. I think Trace Jackson. It is a big if. But Trace Jackson Davis is a 4. I've compared him to DJ White before as a kind of guy who he reminds me of in high school. Obviously, he's not exactly like DJ, but a little bit like that, where he's coming in and he's a guy who I think has a good shooting touch, but hasn't developed it all the way out past the free throw line yet. So he's going to be a post guy. So if Deron Davis can't go full time, you got Trace Jackson Davis there. You've got, some other guys on the team, Race Thompson. How did they develop? All that stuff. So look, if a guy like Trendon Wofford wants to come to IU, I'm all for it. I would love to have another wing scorer, another shooter, something like that. I don't think we need back to the basket post guys, though. I think that situation is pretty well sorted on this roster.
Interesting. Okay, a couple interesting things to talk about there. But Andy, where does your wish list begin?
I think it begins with shooting, and then it has a little bit more shooting on it, and then if you go down another notch, it has shooting on it.
Someone who can shoot like Ryan Klein, apparently, because everybody in the chat mob is going crazy about some shot that he just made.
Yes. Anyway, so I just, going back to what I said before, you just can't continue to sustain yourself and get improvement on the offensive side of the floor if you don't have that. And there's not really Armand Franklin, who shot the ball, well as a senior. So, how does that translate in his first year as a college player is hard to do. You've seen Al make improvements. I think Rob will make improvements, and Devontae's been streaky, but you don't have like a knockdown guy, particularly at a, kind of wing size. Like I was, find me another like Cam Johnson that UNC has, which is not going to be easy to do because I think he's even taller than that. He's 6'9" or whatever he is. So I think somebody like that gives you some lineup flexibility on the wing would be, maybe priorities 1 and 2 for me. I think the post player, piece, the Joey Brunk thing came out when he announced he was transferring from Butler. Depending upon if we do see some of those transfers, and maybe my opinion is different, but if you have Deron with a full off season, again, his health is always going to be a question mark until he, proves that it's not, quite honestly. But I just don't know. I think you've got some guys. Jake Forster has always been kind of viewed as not a project necessarily, but a guy who will be able to come along and give you some minutes. And I think between he and Race and Trace, I think you've probably got enough you could cobble together there. Where you're really thin is that, kind of wing, true small forward type player and somebody who can knock down threes. And I think if you can find that in the same guy, that becomes a really valuable player. And maybe that guy is Jerome Hunter. We just don't know. I think his health situation, at least based on what we know, is more up in the air than what we would say Deron's health situation would be heading into that. So that to me is where you need the most insurance.
We're all pretty much on the same page here because, what I wrote down is outside shooting, obviously, preferably someone 6'5" or 6'6" who might even be able to play 4 in smaller lineups. Because that's the thing, none of the big guys on Indiana can shoot. Justin, who plays a lot of 4, can't shoot. Trace Jackson Davis, not a shooter. Deron Davis, not a shooter.
Justin needs to learn how to shoot this offseason if he's going to be at Indiana. He
does, but I'm not going to bank on it. I'm not going to project forward.
He needs to be able, even if it's not from 3, he needs to be able to hit a 15-foot jumper. He
does.
And it's,
some of this improvement is going to have to come internally. Like some guys are just going to have to get better. There's absolutely no question about it.
But I like the development curve of Armand Franklin and Rob Finney, though people talk about shooters not on the roster. I like the development curve there. Rob Finney could not shoot threes as a junior in high school. Got better as a senior, was shooting really well before his concussion, started shooting better at the end of the season too. And I think that, we like those progression curves for guys. I like the progression curve for Al, but it's got to get there. That now it's a matter of taking that next step.
And just remember with Rob, Rob basically shot the same percentage from 3 this year on a similar number of attempts that Yogi did his freshman season. And Yogi then the next 3 years was 40% or better. No, I don't think Rob is as good of a shooter as Yogi. Definitely not as good of a shooter off the dribble, but that just shows you sometimes it can take shooters a little while to adjust. And I would expect Rob to be a 35, 36% guy next year. And if you've got him at 35, 36%, Devontae around 39, 40%, and Al 37, 39, you can live with that from your guards. Now, it'd be nice to have a knockdown guy like I saw Michael in here. His wish list is Max Bielfeldt and Nick Zeisloft. Yeah, that would pretty much be the perfect additions to this roster. But, so I think we all agree we've got to get shooting and preferably some kind of wing that is insurance for Jerome Hunter's health and insurance for Justin Smith's development and consistency of mindset. I think that would be really helpful. Now, we'll have to see if that's available. What I think is an interesting debate is a guy like Joey Brunk. Because initially, when I saw that he was transferring, kind of looked at his stats, he's obviously a guy who can score pretty efficiently in the post, but there's not a lot of other stuff statistically that jumps out. No, I didn't watch a ton of Butler this year, so I may not be the perfect person to give you a scouting report on him, but I will say this. I was initially a little hesitant about that idea, but as you start thinking about Deron Davis's health, which we've talked about, and his inability to consistently play 20 to 25 minutes, and then some of the inexperience that you have with the other depth there, having a postman that can come in that is experienced, that can go get you buckets, that is going to be, I know, he's a high IQ player, good team guy. I can see that being really helpful, especially when you get into the dog days of the Big Ten. You may need that depth down low, and especially another guy to bang against Trace and make him better and take a little pressure off of him. So I'm not saying he's a perfect addition, but I like it. I like that potential addition much more than I did initially, Andy.
Yeah, I think I just struggle with that, and maybe I'm too hung up in the stats with him. I don't know if he's that guy. When you look at Joey Brunk, but I get the thought of, do you need some insurance? And that's kind of how if it's a post player, you're doing it because you need insurance, not necessarily because you feel like there's a definitive void on the team of something. I think the void is really where you have from a shooting perspective. And to me, insurance wise, you need more. If Justin Smith doesn't develop a jump shot like we talked about, if Jerome Hunter's not healthy, to me, that's a far more you can't tell yourself a story very easily of a way to fill that hole. You can tell yourself a story, whether it's, ultimately believable or not, who's to say, but you can at least tell yourself a story about the front court that helps. And I think you also need
and to be clear, the front court guy would come second. Like that would be the second priority for me.
Yeah, I also think you just need, somebody who can just go get you a bucket when you need one. I think that's the one thing that IU relied on Romeo a number of times, and everybody can have their own debate about whether he came through in those situations or not. There certainly were times that he did, and really a guy who can drive and be a dynamic person that the other team has to take away. But I think the other thing, we're talking a lot about skill and size and things like that. I think the attitude of whoever you bring in is pretty important. Like there's not really I've been catching up on some of the Hoosier Hysterics podcasts, and they had Coverdale on, and a couple of the other guys have had, they needed the kind of FU guy that was out there. And it's like, that's definitely something that IU needs, with that kind of attitude, a little bit more demonstrative than some of the guys they have. So I think if you're looking for, intangibles and stuff like that, I think that's I don't know, maybe that is a skill in and of itself, but I think you also need somebody like that that's really going to bring some attitude to the equation as well, because that's something that was really lacking with this team a lot, that edge and whatever that is. So maybe you're willing to give up a little bit of one of the other things we talked about to be able to get somebody who's really going to be able to come in and provide that right away, which
Agreed.
I think is difficult for somebody to come into a brand new situation and kind of be that guy. I think it takes a fairly special person to be able to step in and do that. So I don't know that that's something that's out there or not at this point.
No. In terms of names, some of the names that you're going to hear, because it doesn't have to be a grad transfer. There could be guys in the class of 2019. Trendon Watford, Harlan Beverly, Lester Quinones, all kind of fill what we were talking about, which is a wing guy who can score. Now, I would not get that interested in any of these guys from a fan perspective until they visit. Until Trendon visits again or Archie meets with him, until Quinones or Harlan Beverly take an official visit. Those are just names that you're going to hear. And I think it's pretty much the same thing with the grad transfers. I mean, there are so many guys transferring now, and you've probably read Joey Brunk and Derek Smits and Kira Lewis, who Indiana, was recruiting before he went to Alabama. There's a guy from Charleston Southern that actually kind of fits the description. He's a wing guy that can shoot threes pretty well. But you can drive yourself crazy trying to project all this stuff. Let's wait and see who Indiana targets, where we get a visit from to kind of see. But, Ryan, a guy like Kira Lewis is interesting, where he may not necessarily fit what we were talking about right now. He's not necessarily a knockdown shooter. He's not necessarily a wing guy, but he's such a talented playmaker and guard that if you could get a guy like that, you would obviously do it in a second, because that's an NBA player. Now, he might have to sit out a year, although he could probably get a waiver because they lost their coach and they give out waivers all the time now. But if you get a guy like that, even though maybe that changes the role for Rob Finney, something like that, when you can get that kind of injection of talent, that's also something that you would want to look at, and you kind of figure out the roles and the lineups later.
Yeah, I think that's a guy like Kira Lewis is, that's a no-brainer because he's the best player in the transfer protocol. He's a guy who can score. He's a combo guard. He doesn't take minutes away from Rob Finney. He can play off the ball.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that any of those guys, either at least worth consideration. You get on my campus, you see what they've got. But Indiana has to be, I think that you have to be choosy in who you take, because if there's just one scholarship, if there's two, maybe you do take a Brunk if there's two. Maybe you do
only if there's two. I don't think you can take him if there's only one.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If there's two, maybe you take a guy like that, but you don't take a guy like that if there's one, because you need shooting, and I think we all know that you need shooting, you need scoring, and needed the offense to take a step forward next year. So I think that's just where we're at right now with this team.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything, Andy, that if you saw would kind of concern you this offseason in terms of like guys that they're targeting, or, because like the Fitzner addition, we all thought that was a pretty smart addition when it happened. In hindsight, it didn't turn out as well as maybe we all hoped. Like, is there anything that you're hoping that they avoid doing? Maybe it's hard to project.
I guess
forward.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard. I mean, I guess if you look back at the Fitzner thing, you could look back and say it was a guy whose minutes were declining as he got further into his career, and I think that was partly personnel and things like that. I mean, I think ideally, if you're going to take a grad transfer, you'd really want to get a guy who played a major role already. I think at that point, you're getting somebody that you expect to be able to step in. And with Fitzner, I don't know that they ever really expected him to be able to step in right away and play 25 minutes a game at all. But I do think if you're going to go after somebody at this point, as you're really trying to build up your culture and all those kinds of things, it does feel like you got to get a guy who's definitely been there. If you want to do that you're going to be able to get in. I think to bring somebody else in a complementary role becomes a little bit weird. So like the Joey Brunk thing to me, and you hear people talk about in the NFL, like this guy's a progress stopper because he's preventing some of the younger guys from playing. Do you bring him in, and does that take minutes away from a Jake Forster or a Race Thompson that you're really expecting to be there? Brunk's a little bit different because he'd have 2 years to play. But if you bring in somebody that's a 1-year guy, does it prohibit you from playing other people that you'd like to be able to get minutes and really try to build as 4-year guys that they're ready to take the next step in their development? So if it's somebody who it seems like they stand in the way of doing that, which is more positional and less skill based because you're taking a guy who really hasn't played a major role on another team, even at what you would deem to be a lower level. I think that would be a little bit concerning.
But you know what is a big swing skill for this program for next year is Race Thompson's three-point shooting, which may sound kind of crazy if you didn't kind of watch him play in high school, Ryan, but he's a guy who can hit threes. And if he can, if he now, maybe he's not ready to do that next year, but if he can step out, to me, he becomes your starter at the 4, because now he allows you to space the floor a little bit as one of your only big guys who can actually step out and shoot. Again, I don't know if he'll be ready to do that next year, but it's something he has shown in the past. So keep that in mind, because that would be huge for this team, because he fits at the 4 defensively, but it's tough to play him with Deron if he can't step out and make shots.
Yeah, it's impossible to know what the lineup's going to be. Where's Trace Jackson Davis? How are they going to deploy him? How healthy is Deron?
Yeah.
Is Deron going to be able to play 30 minutes a game or 25 minutes a game? Where do these guys fit? And so it's just going to be interesting. It's impossible to project. But yeah, let's say this. I mean, Race Thompson is going to see a lot of time on this team, and he should, because he's very good, and he can be very good, and he can step out. I'm not saying that Race Thompson needs to be a guy who's shooting threes on a regular basis for IU, but he needs
just the threat.
Just the threat, and he needs to be able to step out and knock a few down.
Yep. Okay, coming up in our third and final segment, we will answer your questions, which include several about Archie. What did we learn about our coach this season? And could Archie's job really be in jeopardy as soon as next season without a trip to the NCAA tournament? We have some thoughts. Stick with us on the Assembly Call. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I am Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. Remember that you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup, even during the offseason, and after every game, we send out a detailed post-game analysis email.
There's a high-level operation going on out there.
Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866. Or go to assemblycall.com.
Make no excuses.
All right, well, it is time now for our mailbag. All of these questions were submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community, which you can learn more about at assemblycall.com/community. So Jeff asks, we always talk about players having to learn, but what about coaches? I think Archie is a really good coach. He proved it at Dayton, but he's just finished his sophomore year in the Big Ten. What do you think he learned last year that helped him this year, and what lessons should we take from this season as a coach? Ryan, you and I addressed this earlier this week on Banner Monday, some of the things about, his first experience getting to coach a 5-star, one and done player like Romeo Langford, the ability to really go through some serious turmoil and kind of see it through on the other end and kind of what you'll learn from that. Andy, as you look at this past season for Archie, what do you think are some of the things that he did learn or that you maybe hope that he learned as he continues to grow as a young coach?
I think the big thing from my perspective is looking back at, that stretch of all the losses and all those things, and, getting that Minnesota game. And he said after that was a deal breaker. And I think he just gave this team way too much rope at that point. And I hope that whatever he was able to do to pull them out of that, and the changes that he made, whether that was in practices or in responsibilities from a player standpoint, or how he held people accountable, whatever you want to call those things, it just went too long to be able to do that. So I think being able to kind of squash some of these kind of situations before things really snowball becomes important. The coaching one and done thing, I think, is a good one, but you guys touched on that before. I do think that's a unique situation, and one that he really hadn't been in a position to have to do. And it was one of those, you'd never say, I don't want to go get a guy like Romeo Langford. I don't want to go get a 5-star that's an Indiana kid. You're going to do that. You're going to be in other positions where the nature of the job is you better go and do your best to land that kid. And if you do, how do you handle him? How do you integrate him into other, into whatever else you have going on? I just think, I think that'd definitely be a learning experience. Those are the two things from my perspective.
Ryan, anything else for you that for me, I would say the other thing is just how important shooting is, and that come hell or high water, you got to field a team that can shoot better than these last two have.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. I think shooting's a big one. I think also just how to manage injuries and where you need to have depth on the roster. You can't rely so heavily on certain guys at certain positions. You have to have depth, and that's why you recruit. You recruit to have depth. So I think that's a big one for me is just to know that, look, guys are going to get injured, guys are going to get banged up, guys are not going to be able to give you 100% all the time. So you've got to figure out how to, manage your roster that way.
So Ryan, Kathy's question is, do you really think that Archie would be fired next year if we miss the tournament again? Obviously, it's a big year. He's missed it his first 2 years. It's 3 straight years for the program. How hot will the seat get if Indiana misses the tournament next year?
Oh, extremely. I would not. If Indiana misses the tournament next year, there's a good chance Archie won't be back. I'm not saying it's a great chance, but I think there's a pretty solid chance he won't be back. It depends on how the season goes, of course. But if you miss the tournament your first 3 years, yeah, I would say, especially when you had 2 McDonald's All-Americans in that time, because Trace will be on the team, and you've got, certain players that you went after, certain players that you got, and you got your roster together, all that. I think that there's a pretty good chance he's not back if they don't make the tournament again.
Interesting. I mean, certainly I think the seat would be red hot. I tend to think that he would get the 4th year, but you're right. It kind of depends on how the season goes, the context of it and what it looks like. But I think, you miss it again. I mean, if he doesn't lose it, he may want to lose it at that point, because I can't imagine, this fan base dealing with that. Well, nor should they. I mean, frankly, that should be just completely unacceptable to miss it 4 years in a row. And it will be a challenge. I don't think this team will be picked to make the tournament in the preseason. The expectations are going to be low. But Andy, what do you think? What do you think the outcome would be if that's what comes to pass?
It's one of those where I think you went after him. He was a guy that was really targeted by Fred Glass from the get-go. And so I just feel like, would there be pressure building to be able to do something? Yes, but I struggle to believe that as a guy that he really targeted and went after that hard, that you would turn away from that in 3 seasons. But again, if things really go off the rails, I suppose I could see it, but I do think that's a little bit difficult when you kind of put the hire into context and you think back to some of the things that were said at that point and the way that the search really went. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but I think red hot would be would definitely be the temperature of the seat at that point if they wouldn't make it. Even though I think as you look, there are reasons to believe and not to believe that they actually could make it, but I think it's a pretty pivotal year, as I said at the beginning. That's for sure.
Yeah, if you made me place a bet on it right now, would he get year 4 if they miss the tournament year 3? I would say yes, but I think you're right, Ryan. There's a chance depending on how it goes, and if the program doesn't show any progress, and if the offense struggles as much as it did this year, I suppose it would be within the realm of possibility. Whereas it really wasn't this year, it only being his 2nd year. Question from Bill. What does it say about Archie's reluctance to give his freshmen and other bench players more playing time? Do you feel he was worried about having their confidence broken before they were ready, or was that he just didn't have confidence in them to give meaningful minutes? And this was a subject that came up a ton in January and February. We didn't hear about it as much later in the season when guys were healthier. But Ryan, what do you make of that? To me, it's just that those guys weren't ready for the minutes.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how they played. I don't think they were. Even Race Thompson, who we all really liked, got lost on defense some. I think it was pretty clear to me Z Anderson wasn't ready for college basketball. I think that some of the other guys, they just need to develop. And that's sometimes kids just need to develop. I mean, there's a lot of teams now that are playing redshirting instead of having a guy spend his freshman year and not play a whole lot. But yeah, I don't know. I think that I think it's just maybe also a philosophy thing. He had older guys he trusted more, and I think also he wants those guys to develop, but he also didn't think they were ready for the big time yet.
Yeah, Andy, what do you think?
I would agree, and I would add that in most cases, it felt like when they actually did get on the floor, that you saw why, or you could see what they were doing, and really tell yourself a story that. Yeah, I get it. The things that he was concerned about, you see. I mean, even Race, who had some good minutes. I mean, when he came in against Wichita State, though, he really struggled in those couple minutes that he was in there defensively. And it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing where, well, are they going to get better if you don't give them the minutes, or they're not earning the playing time in the first place? That's a hard line to walk, I think. But to me, it seemed like more often than not, the play on the floor kind of showed that there were reasons that they weren't getting in, and those seemed warranted at that point. But on a young roster, at some point, you have no choice but to turn around and play somebody who doesn't have the experience and may not be quite ready, because you just don't have a choice. I think the injuries forced them into a lot of that over the course of the year. But I also, get from their perspective of why that wasn't there. So I think some of that's roster construction, just in terms of the makeup of these guys from a what class they're in standpoint.
Reflecting back to Kathy's question, Coach had a good comment in the chat. He said, I would have to be okay with not making the tournament for 5 or 6 years with another change in coaching, which is true, which is why I don't think it will happen. Because, again, barring some kind of disaster, like, the foundation is set for things to be pretty good in years 4 and 5 if you kind of project forward and if recruiting stays on the track that it's on. Of course. But that's why this year 3, what I'm saying is that's why next year is so important, though. You've got to show progress. I really have a hard time believing Archie wouldn't be able to see this through for years 4 and 5, but I get why the question comes up after you miss the NCAA tournament your first 2 years. That's why year 3 is really, really important, because I think years 4 and 5 have a chance to be really good, but let's get there and let's show growth next year, obviously. And hopefully, growth is making the tournament, because Indiana made the NIT this year, so the next step would be making the NCAA tournament. Ryan Jane asks, what's the offseason going to look like? What will the team be focusing on despite no organized practices? And are there any staff changes in the mix? We know one thing that Coach definitely does not want to see this offseason.
And I don't want to see about vertical leaps anymore. I don't want to see workout tapes. I want to see heart and competitive tapes all summer from the Indiana basketball Twitter account.
That's right. No more vertical leap tapes. Those look a lot better the offseason when there's high hopes than the offseason after a deflating season. So I don't think any of us want to see those now. But Ryan, what will this offseason look like? Players will obviously get a chance to go home at some point. Some guys may stay over for the summer, and then at a certain point, individual workouts with coaches obviously begin. But what will it look like overall?
Yeah, they're going to spend a lot of time with Cliff Marshall. They're going to be in Cook Hall. They're going to live in Cook Hall. I think that there's going to be a lot of focus on shooting, a lot of focus on getting stronger, a lot of focus on getting quicker, things like that. Work on your lateral quickness, things like that. A guy like Demizi really has to hit the gym because his body is not at the level of a college basketball player right now. He's a little slow. He's flat-footed. He needs to develop some lift on his jumper. He needs to develop a lot. And that goes for all those guys. They just all need to continue to develop and morph their bodies into the level of a college basketball player. Those young guys, they're the most, they're the most important guys to get better, and all of them need to work on that.
What about the staff changes question? Because we've talked about how Archie maybe could.
No idea.
I have no idea either. I haven't heard anything about it. In fact, the only things that I've heard are that it's not likely.
Yeah.
So
I wouldn't be shocked if there are no changes. I would, I think, like to probably have a maybe somebody come in and look at the offense, but it doesn't have to be a full-time staff member. Just bring somebody in as a an analyst or whatever to sort of check out what they're doing and maybe offer some critiques.
Andy, because again, we've talked on the show about the possibility of bringing in kind of an offensive guy. What do you think about that possibility?
I think I don't think anyone would argue it's not needed at this point, but I do think it's a little bit hard to figure out where that would be because given the roles the guys are playing on the staff, Ostrom has been with Archie for a long time. Schilling is the, kind of player development with some local ties. And then Bruiser Flynn, I think, might eventually leave if he gets a chance at another head coaching job. I just don't know that that's in the cards. And so that becomes a little bit harder to figure out where that actually comes from. But I do think anybody who watched this team at times over the course of the season and watch them consistently knows that there's a need to try to change some things up offensively. So I think there'd be value in doing that. But again, you're trying to put the picture together of how that actually comes into play. That's where it gets a little bit harder.
With our final 30 seconds here, Andy, as you're watching the NCAA tournament, do you root for other Big Ten teams to win or do you root for Big Ten teams to lose?
It was funny. My neighbor walked by. I was out shooting baskets in the driveway with my younger daughter. And he goes, "Oh, you guys are you rooting for Purdue in this game?" And I go, "Absolutely not." So that's where I go. Some of the other Big Ten teams maybe, but they're a tough one to convince yourself to root for.
Ryan, how do you approach it when you're?
I don't really root for anybody who's not Indiana. I don't want other Big Ten teams to win. Why would I do that? Why would I?
Just to make the conference look better, I guess.
No, absolutely not. I don't want another fan base that we have to deal with raising a banner or going far in the tournament. Also, Purdue's about to win, and they don't deserve
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
It's a perfect place to stop. All right. That's going to do it for us on this week's edition of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us
in the chat mob
at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Thank you, as always, for listening. We will talk to you again on Monday for the last edition of Banner Monday. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
Thank you for being here and for listening to this episode of the Assembly Call. We appreciate it. And we really do rely on the support of audience members like you to keep our show going and to keep growing. And so we have set up a page on our website at assemblycall.com/support that lists 5 ways that you can support the Assembly Call. And we encourage you to choose whichever method is the easiest and most convenient for you. One of the methods is donating, and so many of you have donated, and we appreciate it so much. On that page, you can choose a monthly recurring donation or an annual recurring donation or just a one-time donation, whatever works for you. And if you don't want to donate, another way to support the show is you can use our affiliate URLs, iutickets.shop or iustore.shop when you're going to shop for tickets or gear, and we will get paid a small commission when you use those links. But however you support the show, we appreciate it. Thank you.